at this later. It takes just a second to set up this process, and I like to make sure the integration has occurred before I flip it over to Andrea so that I'm not kind of toggling back and forth. And
Brenda, while you're setting it up, how much time do the speakers usually have? I'll try to keep it in that time, and then we can talk. And there's also a giveaway at the end if you guys want to stick around, and I'll explain that more later.
Yeah, I think if you want to try to end by 8:45, I think we'd be in good shape.
Okay.
Does that work for you?
Yep.
Okay, and I think we're live on Facebook. I'm trying to pull my Facebook up in a separate window to see if anyone is on Facebook and you're able to see it, let me know. But I think we're going to be assuming we're live. I'm not seeing a message that's telling me I got an error message. So I'm going to assume we're live right now. And it does say live on Facebook on my screen. So I think we're good to go. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to present our Andrea Wright. And Andrea, you can go ahead and take it from here.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me today. Guess what we're going to talk about? Change. We have been in the midst of so much change lately, haven't we? Hold on, and my computer just decided it didn't want to change slides. All right, there we go. So change can be anything from a small shift to a huge transformational leap. And I think we've all been a part of that in some form or another, whether it's personal or in a company. And you know what? I found sometimes those small changes, those small shifts can be the absolute hardest. So I started out in my very first job over 20 years ago in a change initiative, leading a change in a residential company to have people building all of the buildings or all of the houses that they built in a different way. So it happened in my first job, and then throughout my career, it never changed. And a couple of years ago, I decided to go on my own and work with others. So throughout my career, I've worked with individuals, I've worked with teams, I've worked with companies as a whole to bring about change in all sorts of different areas. So I'm excited to share some of my lessons learned with you today. Yeah, I really like to just put change into two buckets. I think, you know, individual change. So often our goals are that lead us to these change initiatives. Maybe we want healthier lifestyles. We want to, we're going to move into a manager role or a leadership role or a completely new position that requires a lot of change in our lives. You know, we might be creating or changing habits. Lately, many of us have been learning to balance working from home and having our kids at home. It's a huge change. You know, we've changed in the way that how we're protecting our faces with face masks and washing our hands all the time. And, you know, anybody thinking of any other personal change that they're going through, please chat it in. And then the other one is group change, right? And change within an organization. And this is often change that is imposed on us, whether we're leading it or we're affected by it, right? It could be new technology being implemented. It could be new culture, changing the culture that we're in. There could be new policies and procedures. Right now, adopting COVID procedures and working from home in offices is a big change. So we're always dealing with change, whether we realize it or not. And it can be stressful and it can be fun. So let's talk about how we can make it better. But the truth is, when we look at change initiatives, 60 to 70% of change in organizations fail. And 92% of individuals fail to achieve their goals long term. Those are some devastating numbers. And we can talk about what happens, but let's talk about that organizational change. Have any of you ever been a part of, right? So there's a change that needs to happen, possibly a new policy, a new system. They pick a team, they make a great schedule, they make a plan with all the important steps in it, right? And then that team does all their initial researching and everything that they need to do to make sure that they've made the right decisions and make the right moves. And what we don't realize is that team is actually moving through a change process. Then when they make the best decisions for the company, they launch it. And then the company goes, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. I don't like it. You just threw this in my face. Why would I change? This is stupid, right? Even the best plan fails. Has any of you ever been a part of this in a company? Either you are on the end of making the change happen or on the receiving end of, I'm not doing it. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I want you to think about what do you think happened there, right? And then let's talk about personal change, right? So we decide we're going to be organized, right? I've seen this other person organized, and I need to put my stuff in binders or in files. My stuff's everywhere. This year, I'm going to take on this change of organization, right? And then you read a book. You read it from A to Z. You highlight it. You take notes. And then you implement X, Y, Z, exactly what they said. And 2 weeks in, you fail. I'm not doing this. It's too much work. I can't do it. I don't like it. And then what happens? We feel like a failure. And then we tell ourselves, you know what? This confirms my toxic belief that I just shouldn't even try new things. This is stupid, right? What do you think happened there? Why are we achieving such poor results? And it's because there is a common denominator. Does anybody know? Do you want to type in the common denominator? What are we missing? Give you a chance. Anybody? Motivation, focus. Yep, there's something else. It is the people, right? So the common denominator is we're missing the people. We make these plans, we make them in a bubble, and we don't really think about the different types of people that we have. And so we fall short individually within a team or within a company because we haven't looked at the different types of people, right? So we must understand when we make change, before we make our big plans and our big schedules, who the change affects. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We want to talk about how those people plan and take action so that we can help them move through the change process. And we want to make sure that we are communicating appropriately with everybody, every step of the way, so that they can be on board with the change. So some other things to think about with the change process that I don't think people think about. They think about, we're going to have a change. Day one, it's going to go perfectly, and poof, everybody's going to start doing it the way that they should do it. And the truth is, it takes time, it takes understanding. Change is sort of a process that works through, and I always like to tell people change looks like this, right? We take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And it just keeps going back and forth. But what happens is that we reach the final end eventually. And so a great example of this is maybe changing to a healthy lifestyle. This is a simple example, right? When I started moving to a healthy lifestyle, I was eating candy bars all the time, and I was drinking McDonald's Coke, which is still the best thing in the world. And then, I took some of this stuff out of my life, ate more vegetables and did whatever. But then at some point, I started to revert back to my old ways, and I had to think about it and figure out what was going on and get back and move forward. But every time I had a bit of a setback, I never moved back to as bad as I was originally. So now I'm here. I'm way over here in my goal and in my change, and I'm going to get here eventually, but it just takes a little bit of time, and we need to have understanding. And that happens on an individual level, and it happens on a company level. So we can't imagine that everybody's just going to change immediately as we go through. Right? And it also, change happens much faster in a crisis, right? As we've seen with COVID, there's a saying, don't waste a good crisis if you want to create change. So you can get people on board with change a little bit faster, but it still goes back. So as we look at everybody stayed home for a couple of months, and then now people are going back to restaurants and bars, and maybe they're not protecting themselves. Sometimes it's really about the change and reminding them, why are we doing this? Let's keep moving forward. And sometimes, again, we're just going to take a couple steps back. So let's talk about who. The change starts with who, right? We need to talk about who is affected by the change. And always before you create that plan, right? Are they office staff? Is it the field, people that work in the field? I work a lot in the construction industry, so there's a big difference between the people in the office and the people in the field. Are they road warriors, maybe salespeople, or people that they just work and are always traveling to different offices? Do they work from home? Are they a hybrid of home and in the office? Is it a personal change? And if it's a personal change, did we talk to or look at the people that it will affect around us when we make that change that could alter our results? And the funny thing is this takes literally 5 to 10 minutes to figure out who we've affected, and then maybe looking at what percentage of their role or their life or whatever this change is bringing about will be affecting. It's quick, it's easy, and it's often missed because we get very tactical and start planning out what we're going to do. And then I like to talk about how. Not how are we going to do it, but how do you and others adapt to change, solve problems? What steps do you go through to solve a problem? How do you prefer to see information? Do you need a lot of information, or do you need a little bit of information that's summarized so you can work through understanding what's going to be happening? How do you like to be communicated to? Is it email? Is it text? Do you need an in-person meeting? Do you need a demonstration where you can touch or feel and figure out what's going on? And most importantly, how are you going to resist? Different people resist change in different ways. And if we understand that, then we can take action to make sure that we help them through that process. You know, I like to go back to the getting organized, right? I've been hired by individuals and I've been hired by companies to help people get organized because, you know what, they're just not organized like the rest of us. And there are actually some very specific problem-solving types that they're not going to get organized. They could have a chaos and piles on their desk and they can pull out the piece of paper and they know right where it is. You organize them and they get very inefficient and forgetful. So we need to be careful about trying to make everybody in that cookie cutter space when we're looking at trying to solve problems. Another example is when I don't understand how I solve problems or how I act, I might assume that everybody does it like me, that it's just common sense, right? Common sense is you would use this specific software and put just the bottom line information in it. Well, the person that designed that software to have that happen was somebody that was, you know, like a bottom liner. They just got the essential facts and they put it out there. They didn't like too many details. So they didn't understand that it's not common sense for the people who need a lot of details, and they're going to need some training and help to move through and make that type of a change. The many faces of change. I just want to dig deeper and talk about, you know, what we get from understanding ourselves and others. As I've worked with people throughout the years, right, we talked about that, a lot of information versus a little. You know, some will need lots of information and some won't. And if we can't understand how people need the information, we can have a lot of problems working through change. So an example of my own and a change that I made, right, I had a boss and we just did not meet eye to eye. You know, if we were talking about anything, I explained it too much. I talked and he would cut me off because he didn't want to hear me. And what I learned was I looked at how he processed information and he needed the bottom line results. So what I dubbed, and I've taught this to a lot of people, I called it the Steve one-pager. So if there was anything that we needed to do, any initiative that we needed to discuss, any plan we were putting in action, I turned it into a one-pager. I bullet pointed it, and I got my thoughts very succinct and clear about what needed to be talked about. If there was a budget, it quickly went on the page. I would give them the paper and I would walk through step by step by step by step. As soon as I made that change about how I communicated to them, we had a fantastic relationship. And still somebody I know very well today and just a great person. But in the beginning, because I didn't understand and I didn't make that change, it was very difficult. You know, another example of some people need to understand what stays the same versus what's changing. I worked with a guy who had become a manager. The company knew, and the person who put him in that position thought he would be a fantastic manager, and he just was missing the mark. And what we realized, looking at, you know, his position had changed, his job had changed, and unfortunately, he didn't have a box around or process to understand what those changes were and how it applied to him. So we worked on how to put it in a box, what he needed to find out, and he could go and find that information out. And within a few meetings, he was a great manager because he was able to understand what the change was and how it affected him and how to process it in his own way. You know, one of the things we also have to think about is, you know, how did we roll it out? So we're going to talk about communication in a minute, and how did we roll out that change? Another team that I worked with, they added a new role, a general superintendent. They added it a year before we talked, and it just fell down. It didn't work. Nobody adapted it. The company or the guys had requested it. They'd been asking for it for years, and when they implemented it, nobody did it. So we just went back through and talked about, well, in your plan and in your rollout, what happened? And what happened was that they didn't explain to them. We learned about the type of people, what changed, what stayed the same, what was not going to happen anymore. And as soon as we relaunched it with a way that they could understand the change, it took hold, and now they have this general superintendent role that's doing exactly what they wanted it to do. So when we miss the people portion of change, we often miss the buck, no matter how good our plan is. So I want to take a minute to talk about what I use. I use a couple assessments to understand how people plan and take action when I'm looking at change. So I'm going to take a step back and talk about the 3 parts of the mind for a minute. When anybody takes action, when anybody solves a problem, they have 3 parts of the mind: the thinking, feeling, and doing. So when we're thinking, that's our cognitive or our IQ, right? We don't really test that in the work environment. We don't need to, okay? But that's the one side. We need our brain to make sure that we can do what we need to do. No problem. Then there's the feeling side, and we can measure this with affective assessments. It's our personality. It ebbs and flows over time. It changes a little bit based on, you know, where we are in our life. And we can use assessments like the DISC, the Myers-Briggs. If any of you are Simon Sinek fans, there is a test out there to test your why. And there's all kinds of other affective personality style assessments, and a majority of the ones in an organization are done as a personality or an affective type. And then there's a third that we don't look at often. It's called it's our conative side of the brain. It's striving, it's how we solve problems, it's an innate ability that we have in us since from the day we're born, right? We're kind of like, what handed are you? Are you right-handed or left-handed? That's just something that happens to you that's sort of set. So this is an innate ability about how you solve problems. And Colby is the one that can assess how you do that. So what I like to do when it's possible to do 2 assessments, and I always do it with people that I coach, is we do an affective. I do the DISC, so I understand the personality at play and who they are. And then on top of that, we do the conative assessment. So now we're going to know how that personality solves problems, right? And when we know how somebody innately solves problems, we can help people to learn to be free to be themselves. And having the personality side of it, we know how they're going to go about doing that. Are they an introvert? Are they an extrovert? Are they very social versus not social? So there's a lot of things at play when we do that. And I think it's important that not only when we're in a change situation, that we understand ourselves compared to others, right? If we don't understand how we're doing something, we can't really compare it to how others and how we might have to modify or change our communication style to work with them. Oh, and so we do those. All right, so today we're gonna raffle off at the end of the session for 2 participants. We'll receive a Colby A index, and then I'll do an hour review session with you to help you understand how change could be easier for you, and of course explain to you what it means and what type of or what you could use it for. All right, so let's talk about starting with communication early. And I'm talking fast. I'm sorry, guys, I'm trying to get it all in. This is a much longer, condensed thing that I wanted to share with you. So with that, and we communicate, right? It's another piece of the puzzle. And when it's usually left out, right? Because of lack of resources, it doesn't seem as important. We just don't have enough time. But when we communicate to people, we want them to know what is changing, what is staying the same, right? It's often really important for people to understand that just because there's change, it doesn't mean that their entire job has changed. For some, it might be 10%. For some, it might be half of their job, but it becomes more effective or efficient for them to do their job, and then they have opportunity to do other things, right? It's not going to take their job away. What are the benefits to them in their role? What exact benefits does this do? So like I said, you're going to be more efficient with your job. Now you're going to have more time. And now you're going to get to do this other thing that you've been really wanting to do. And most importantly, we have to communicate, what does success look like? On a personal level, on a team level, on a company level. If we don't define success, we may feel like we're failing. And, you know, for a big example of this, when I work with companies to do implementations of software, when it's changing their entire software system in their company, you know what success looks like on day one? The system turns on. That's what success looks like. An implementation where you change it out completely, the system turns on, nobody runs screaming out of the building, and it often takes a couple days for people to even log in to see if they can't log in. So we work through how that happens, and change and the communication happens long after that day that it's supposed to be done. So the same with our own personal goals. What will success look like for us if we were to achieve this a week from now, a month from now, a year from now? And let's be really clear about that so we don't feel like we're failing. There's a lot of different communication vehicles that I talked about before, you know, whether it's email, and this is more corporate, posters, there's video, right? We can hold a meeting, we can go into various meetings, we can do demonstrations, we can let people try to break it. That's very important for some people if they can't try to break it. So we just need to make sure that we're offering that avenue for people to move through the change process, because if we spring it on them at the last minute, even though we know that we made the right choices, they're not going to do it. And on an individual level, communicating can help us stay motivated. Telling everybody we're doing this can help us stay motivated and accountable to get it done, right? What if we're making a change and it impacts the people around us? So communication can be used to let them know what's coming, because we don't want them to try to stop our change from happening. We want them to support us, so we need to let them know what's going on. And some final thoughts as we're going through this, right? Once we understand who is affected by the change and how they plan and take action, we incorporate that into our schedules and our plans and how we're going to attack change, we're going to be more successful. I also just like to remind people, you know, we've got to commit to the plans that we make. It's important for us. We've got to commit to the resources. If it's a corporate plan, excuse me, we have to commit to the resources that we've allotted and not get rid of them so we're not able to finish the change. We have to commit to communicating that change. And we have to make sure that leadership is on board. And I like to say, even if it's personal change, we say that leadership is on board, your leadership, when it's a personal change. And if you're not on board with the change you're going to make or why you're going to make it, you're not going to be successful. And that change goes beyond the launch. So change is a continual process. We have to remember that we have to keep up with it. We have to keep talking with people when we revert back a little bit to move forward, because change takes time. Remember, and it looks like this. So it's just not going to be a wham and a bam. So let's start creating sustainable change, and we'll have some time for Q&A, but in the meantime, why don't we do the raffle in case anybody's got to step off early. Stella, if you're ready for that, Stella's helping me out.
Okay, I'm sitting here up and ready. Someone signed off, I think, but I can't tell for sure. So we'll do the best we can.
Do you need a little time? We could do some Q&A
I'm
first.
To share my
Okay.
screen.
Oh, let me stop sharing.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. There we go.
Guys, while we're waiting for Stella to do this, I'm actually going to stop the recording right now, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So thanks for those that were watching us on Facebook.
Are we stopped? Should I go ahead?
Yep, go ahead.